Welcome back. Let's evaluate your performance on the second field readiness exam by going over the solutions. We'll begin by taking a look at your first task, which was to create a for loop and indexing that printed out only the words that start with an S in this sentence string right here. So we can do that by saying for word in my string. But what we can do is, as the hint says, is use the split method. And recall that the split method by default splits on the white space of a string. So now that split is actually just a list of the words. And we can show this in another cell. Just to clarify that if we do .split here, we can see secret agents, etc., all the words in a list. So now I can iterate through these words in this list, and then I can check what the first letter is by saying take that word, lowercase that word, and then off that word index the very first letter off of it. And then if the first letter is equal to S, then I'm going to print the word. And if I run that, I get back the same results: secret, super, and staying. So key things here was to realize you could use split in order to create this list, and when you're iterating through it, you can use a dot lower to lowercase this entire word, and then use indexing to just grab the first character of that word, and then check to see if it equals lowercase s. Task number 2 was using the same string as previously used. Use a for loop to only print out the words with an even number of characters. It's going to be quite a similar setup. We will say for word in my string, and we'll again split this so we can go through every word in this. We'll say if the length of the word mod 2 is equal to 0, print out the word. So what's actually happening is basically in this key line. Here, length of word is going to return an integer length of every word in this particular list once we call .split on it. Then we'll check if the length of that word, mod by 2, is equal to 0, meaning when you divide it by 2, it has a remainder of 0. If that's the case, then we know that that word only has an even number of characters, so we can go ahead and print it out. Task number 3 was to use a list comprehension to create a list of every first letter in this string. So this is a little trickier because basically you want to rewrite something similar to this, except we don't need to check out the S anymore. Instead, we kind of really want to focus on this line right here. So what do? We can go ahead and say the following. We'll say, set up the brackets, word indexed at 0 for word in my string dot split. Again, basically saying for every word in this list, my string dot split, go ahead and index off 0 from that word, and then here we have the first letters in the string. And if we wanted to, we could have also done dot lower in order to lowercase this first s. That was optional. It's pretty much up to you. Up next was to use list comprehension to create a list of all the even numbers from 0 to 10. So to do that, we can easily say n for n in range, and we'll go 0 up to 11. And then we can have our if statement, if n mod 2 is equal to 0. And you can check out the list comprehension lecture for an example that pretty much looks like this. The next one was pretty similar. It said use the range function to create a list of all the even numbers. So to do that, recall that range function has a third parameter, which is a step size of 2. And then if we cast that to a list, we get back the same results. Likewise, you could have also done the same thing here. You could have just said comma 2 and then gotten rid of this if statement, and that would have been the same thing. Task number 6 was to create a for loop that uses the random library to create a list of 10 random numbers. So to do this with a for loop, we first set up some sort of list as our placeholder, and then we'll say for x in range 0 to 11, so that we do this 10 times. The results list, we're going to append the random number, and we'll say random ran int, that built-in function, and then grab a random number from 0 to 100. And then finally, outside of this for loop, we can go ahead and print the result. And whoops, forgot to import random here. Run this again, and here we see the results. And every time you run this, you're pretty much going to get a different set of results. So keep that in mind. Since they are random numbers, you're not going to get the exact same results every time. Task number 7 was to use list comprehension in the random library to create a list of 10 random numbers. So that's a very similar thing, essentially just transforming the list above into a list comprehension. So we can say random dot rand 0 to 100 for whatever variable n in range 0 to 11. And there we get our random list of numbers. So keep in mind, you could call this n whatever you want. So you could say element, run this, and it'll still work. So it's totally up to you, but this is essentially the list comprehension method of this. Your final task was to create a while loop that's going to continually ask the user to input an even number, and it's going to keep repeating that request until an even integer is provided. So there are lots and lots of ways you could have done this, so keep that in mind. Your results may look different than what I have here, but the way I'm going to do this is I will set some variable called result, and I will start that off as an odd number. And then I will say, while this result mod 2 is not equal to 0, do the following. So all I'm saying here is while this number is not even, continue to do something. So I'll say number provided by the user is input, and then we'll say please input a number. And I will cast this, because remember input returns a string, I will cast this to be an integer. And then I will say if num mod 2 is not equal to 0, meaning this is still not an even number, I'm going to keep the result as an odd number. Else, I will print thank you, that is an even number, and then I will set my result equal to some even number, such as 2. So let's take a look at the logic here. We're saying this results variable starts off as odd, and while it remains odd, go ahead and continually ask for an even number. And once we do have an even number, go ahead and set the result to even, and then we're good to go. So if I run this, it's going to ask me to input a number. We'll put in 3, put in 5, keep putting in odd numbers, but then finally if we put in something like 6, it will say thank you, that is an even number. So that's one way to do this. If it's confusing to you that you have result as the main check, what we can do instead is have result be a Boolean. So we'll say Boolean right now is true, and then we'll say while result, so continually run while result is true, and if the number happens to be odd, we will say result is still true, but if it happens to be even, we'll say result is false. So this is actually the exact same thing, and if this is more readable to you or makes more sense, go ahead and do it this way. Basically, just have some sort of variable whose condition is going to change based off what you wanted to accomplish, which was to get an even number from the user. All right, that's it for Field Readiness Exam number 2. Hope you did well on it. We'll see you at the next lesson, recruit.